This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Heather Sells. A delegation of American evangelical leaders meet with the Saudi Crown Prince. The timing may not be the best, but they say it was planned months in advance. As CBN's Chris Mitchell reports, their trip had a greater purpose in mind.
The visit came following a global firestorm over the death of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. But the planning began a long time ago. The meeting between evangelical leaders from the U.S. and Mohammed bin Salman had been in the works for months, but it came to pass when the delegation made a visit here to the United Arab Emirates.
I think there's a lot of people that would say this is the wrong time to go to Saudi Arabia and meet with the leadership there. I understand that criticism, but I disagree.
While they realized the potential for controversy, the group felt the opportunity to help Christians there was more important.
Given the fact that we care about the people of Saudi Arabia, Christianity in the Arabian Peninsula, the desire to see more freedom of worship, even Christian churches being allowed to be built. Listen, this all seemed important to us.
When people ask, why would you go and why would you meet? I mean, as a Christian called to be a peacemaker, as an advocate for freedom of worship, as an advocate for tolerance and peaceful coexistence, I mean, my answer to that question is, how can I not?
They went not with a political agenda, but with a Christian mission.
Well, when I think of Saudi Arabia, I think of that verse, we are ambassadors for Christ. That's who we're representing, not the United States of America. We're representing the Lord Jesus Christ.
You know, in the Bible, people like Esther, who was in a royal court, Daniel, who approached several kings and played key positions, God used them to speak to people in authority, kings, and the Bible says we're to pray for them.
This is the latest in a series of meetings with Sunni Arab leaders. Those leaders including Jordan's King Abdullah, Egyptian President El-Sisi, and the Crown Prince of the UAE. The meetings are part of a long-term agenda.
We aren't here for a short-term purpose. We are not here for a photo op. We could care less about that. We're here to build long-term relations and to benefit our brothers and sisters that are here in this region.
Rosenberg encouraged Christians to pray.
We're under no illusions about the challenges that have been in Saudi Arabia and remain, but I think it's respectful to go and listen to leaders who have the opportunity to make life better for Christians and actually for Muslims and potentially for Israel as well. I ask people to pray. Pray for the king, pray for the crown prince, pray for the leaders, pray for the people of Saudi Arabia.
Chris Mitchell, Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates.
In Egypt, Islamic militants have killed at least 7 Christian pilgrims and injured 16. The terrorists ambushed 2 buses carrying the Christians to a remote desert monastery south of the Egyptian capital of Cairo. You can find more on this story at cbnnews.com. President Trump is hitting the campaign trail hard right now, just days before the election. Although he's campaigning for specific candidates, his thoughts on immigration and birthright citizenship have dominated his speech.
Hundreds of thousands of children born to illegal immigrants are made automatic citizens of the United States every year because of this crazy, lunatic policy that we can end. Congress has never passed a law requiring birthright citizenship for illegal aliens, and the Constitution does not, I say that to the media, does not require it. Read it. Because illegal aliens are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States.
Coming up, much more on the election, plus a day of reckoning for government leaders who promised pensions but didn't properly plan for them. Well, Ed Stetzer is the executive director of the Billy Graham Center at Wheaton College, and he joins us now with more on where evangelicals stand heading into this election. Ed, we have seen the president stoke fears over immigration this week in an effort apparently to get out the vote. He's even tweeted a video that blames Democrats for the crimes of immigrants. How do you think those who adhere to evangelical beliefs are responding to all this inflammatory rhetoric around immigration?
Well, I think for a lot of people, it's actually going to probably work. We actually see that immigration among those evangelicals who voted for President Trump in the recent research we did is actually their number two most important issue, economy being number one. And evangelicals in general, we look at several polls that have recently come out, they would be the most hard line on immigration. And again, people can debate about numbers and how this all works, but certainly immigration as a concern resonates with evangelical voters.
That's really interesting. It almost seems that fear is more motivating than say, a positive message.
Well, I think if that were not the case, our airwaves would not be filled with negative ads every single day. Of course, I live in the Chicagoland area, and it's quite remarkable the level of fear and negativity that the ads communicate. And I do think, and the reality is people have to decide how they're going to respond to that fear. I think there's a very good case to be made that you could have a debate about numbers of immigration and how many people should come through and how to best secure the border. That's not the debate we're having right now. We're using words like invasion, which really don't make sense in the current situation. We're using words that are intended to incite fear. I think what we'll find, and we're already finding, is that's turning off particularly Republican white women in the suburbs, particularly suburbs of major cities that typically vote Republican. So my guess is we'll see a whole lot of people, a whole lot of congressmen lose their seats in those kind of districts, where it is probably securing the vote in places like senator races in Tennessee and Montana and other places like that. So certainly it's not an uncalculated reality. I mean, this horde, as some might call, caravan of poor unarmed people, others might call, is not going to arrive here until long after the election. And I'm not the first person to predict that you probably won't hear much more about this after next week, after the election's over.
And the survey that you did of the 2016 voters also paints a picture of many evangelicals voting for Trump 2 years ago because they cared about more long-term conservative goals as opposed to being enthusiastic for him personally as a candidate. And this week, the president told CBN News that nobody's done more for Christians or evangelicals than I have. Do you think evangelicals see him as really advancing their cause?
I think so. Yeah, I think that phrase, they see him as advancing their cause. Yes, for many, they're uneasy that he's the person who's advancing their cause. I mean, this is a thrice married adulterer who uses language that evangelicals are shocked and stunned by, who died, and I could list 50 other things, no reason to go through all that. We've already had those discussions. But I do think that it makes many uneasy. What we found is, though evangelicals did overwhelmingly support, particularly white evangelicals, overwhelmingly supported President Trump, then candidate Trump. Part of it is they felt that this was the best choice they had. People often forget now, we're 2 years in, there was another candidate, and her name was Hillary Clinton. And even Slate magazine wrote an article talking about how badly she sought to, or didn't seek to, engage evangelicals, how poorly she engaged evangelicals. So what we found in the research is there are some people who are all in. There are some people who are all in for President Trump. Evangelicals are all in. And there's a whole lot who are kind of like, this was the choice that I had to make, and I wish he wouldn't tweet, and I wish he wouldn't say these things. So, people vote for complex reasons, and there's not an evangelical voter. There's a whole lot of people come to a whole lot of different choices. And so we saw that in the data, and we'll probably see that in the exit polls that come out during the midterm elections next week as well, because if you live in Chicagoland, President Trump's not on the ballot, but every commercial I've seen, he's on the ballot. I'm guessing that's true around the whole country.
Right. It really is interesting how he is the face right now. Well, Ed Stetzer, thanks so much for your time, and we look forward to delving into this more after the election.
Thank you.
Well, here now to discuss the politics around immigration in particular is Suraj Hosny with the Washington Examiner. Suraj, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
The president and one of his top commanders seem to be on different pages in regards to sending troops to the border. What is the latest?
Well, Secretary Jim Mattis, he doesn't really get into political stunts. He explicitly said that when a reporter asked him if they are sending troops to the border as a political stunt. What we're hearing now is that he does it in a very practical way. And, President Obama, President Bush, they both sent troops to the border. There could be anywhere up from 5,000 to 15,000 troops. I'm sorry, around in the tens of thousands of troops that go down to the border. But you're not always thinking of troops in the way that, that go fight in Afghanistan or Iraq or around the world. A lot of active duty troops happen to also be engineers. They happen to be doctors. They're people that build infrastructure. And so what a lot of these active duty troops are going to be doing is hopefully processing a lot of these asylum applicants through the legal process to see if they actually qualify for asylum, as opposed to just staying in the country as undocumented immigrants that don't ever show up for court.
Right. Well, if they can help speed up the legal process anyway, I think everyone would agree that's a good idea. The president is also talking about holding these immigrants in tent cities when they arrive at the border and apply for asylum. And given that the process can take years, how do you see that all playing out?
Well, it could happen similarly to the 2014 crisis when thousands of unaccompanied minors entered the country illegally under President Obama, and many of them were held in detention centers, a lot of times in cells with people who they were not related to. You had a lot of children with people that they came into the country, possibly smugglers. They could have been the real parents, but right now, with the unaccompanied minor crisis, what we know now is that many of them came into the country just trying to get some sort of residency in the country, and we're not 100% sure if they came in with their parents or not. It could be a very similar case here under President Trump, and I think what we're looking at here is it's going to be another long, drawn-out process where we're not entirely sure where these people are coming from and what claims they're making and if they're legitimate. And for the people who actually are persecuted in the countries that they are coming from, you want to expedite their claims as quickly as possible so that they can at least get back to some normal life.
Right. Well, it sounds like there's still a lot unknown. I can't imagine someone living in a tent for several years in the United States. Let me ask you, your paper reported that immigrants from 20 countries are in the caravan and that about 270 of them, in fact, have a criminal conviction. What do you see happening to those people as they come to the U.S. border?
Well, hopefully our immigration process actually works out and the convicted criminals are either detained right away or they're deported back to their country of origin. What we're also reporting is that up to $110 million is being spent to send troops to the border. So obviously it's not a very, it's not a favorable thing for President Trump, who wants to try to keep costs down and, of course, wants to use that money towards building a border wall or even using it towards boosting actual reinforcement of the border. It's possible that with all of these people coming in, you can expect that there's going to be all hands on deck from the administration. And again, it's going to be a long, drawn-out process.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Well, Suraj Hosny, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Cities across America face an economic time bomb. For decades, they've been promising government workers hefty retirement packages. But as Caitlin Burke reports, in many cases, lawmakers have not put enough money into those funds.
Central Falls is Rhode Island's smallest city, but it's made some big headlines. In 2011, it became one of the first cities in the U.S. to file for municipal bankruptcy. After years of economic mismanagement, the city of 19,000 was broke. When something like this happens, cities face major cuts and sacrifices to get back on track. In the case of Central Falls, the state brought in retired state Supreme Court Justice Bob Flanders to help right the city's finances. And the sacrifice came from those expecting retirement payouts.
Bankruptcy is typically called a community of pain, where all the creditors share in the hardship and the pain caused by the bankrupt entity's inability to pay its bills. So here, because the state protected the bondholders, the entire restructuring had to be borne by both the retirees and the active employees.
It was in this auditorium back in 2011 that Judge Bob Flanders told a room full of pension earners that they had two options: risk losing the entire pension promised to them in retirement, or sacrifice 50% of it.
I had to deliver that very difficult and painful message to people who had retired relying on this, and so it was a horrible thing to have to do.
A pension is a promise. City employees like police and firefighters work for a set number of years at relatively low pay in exchange for higher guaranteed benefits once they retire.
In the case of police and fire in Central Falls, they were being allowed to retire after 20 years. And so the average age of these retirees was in their late 40s, 48, I believe. And so they typically still have many working years left, so they're able to obtain a pension and then go out and get another job someplace else and supplement their income for the rest of their working lives.
Decades went by in Central Falls, with each administration talking about better pensions and benefits. Meanwhile, no money was coming in to pay for those promises. Pension debt remains almost invisible. That is, until it's time for the city to pay retiring workers.
This is the poorest city in Rhode Island, and it hadn't seen any significant tax increases for years, despite ever richer pension benefits. So that ended up in a very bad situation where they couldn't pay their bills any longer.
Both active duty and retired Central Falls workers took an immediate hit.
Didn't know if you're going to get a paycheck every 2 weeks. So that first started. And on the same time, you're responding to dangerous calls. And so you're trying to separate your personal and professional opinion about what's going on, but you still have to do your job.
While those on active duty had time to work out a plan B, retired police and firefighters found themselves in a lurch.
It dramatically affected them. 2 of the members I know, they had to go into foreclosure with their houses. And that's, at 70 years old or in your 80s where you counted on this and you worked for this. And these are officers that did about 25 to 30 years on the job. It was hard to see. And we couldn't do anything for them ourselves, even from the perspective of the union, because we were all trying to fight for something.
CBN News reached out to several affected retirees. Their response? After years of fighting to get what they'd been promised, they feel worn down, defeated, and sick of talking about it. Plus, they're tired of seeing their loss used as a cautionary tale for other cities that probably won't pay any heed.
Putting your head in the sand about this like an ostrich isn't going to let the problem go away or get any less severe. It's one that continues to grow with each passing year. And so while the overwhelming temptation is to kick this can down the road as long and as hard as you can so you don't have to deal with it and you leave it for somebody else in the hope that you won't be there when everything explodes, that's obviously not a very good way of solving problems.
In Central Falls, Flanders recognized pension benefits as the biggest part of the problem. As painful as it was, he faced them, diffusing the time bomb.
In my judgment, it's a very effective remedy to deal with issues that, for whatever reason, politically have been unpalatable and unacceptable to the elected officials. Sort of bring in somebody like me from the outside that can have the power to restructure, not worrying about getting reelected or pleasing groups that helped him get elected or that funded his or her campaign. That is enormously helpful in order to get the job done.
Other cities should take note of Central Falls because their retiring workers will also expect to collect a pension. According to one report, however, more than half of the states aren't prepared to pay for the promises made to public employees. Still, someone must pay the price for this extremely broken system when the bill comes due. The question is who? Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Central Falls, Rhode Island.
A musical icon and a popular television actress are making headlines and trending online this week. Here's CBN's Jessica Chaco and Faith Wire's Dan Andros with their stories.
Well, the sound of his voice has become synonymous with the holiday season. But this year, Michael Bublé says he has a lot to be grateful for: the life of his 5-year-old son. Dan, this story is a real tearjerker. Tell us more about it.
Well, if you all remember, about 2 years ago, Michael Bublé and his family were open about that they were going to basically take time off from performing and just focus on their son because he had been diagnosed with cancer at the age of 3. And so they were open about their faith, especially Michael Bublé's wife, during that time, in their brief time in the media, and then they kind of went dark after that. And so now that he's in remission, which is great, he's speaking out about it, and he did so in a carpool karaoke segment with James Corden, which, if you've seen those, they're great segments. He drives to work with a celebrity, and they sing along in the car to their songs. And so Michael Bublé, obviously a fantastic voice. So the segment, if you have 15 minutes of your time, it's well worth the watch because he's singing, which is great. But then halfway through it or so, they discuss his son, and he gets very emotional, and he even says it's very hard for him to talk about. But he discusses how he basically thanks Jesus right there for his son's life, and talks about the importance of giving to these different charities that are working to fight cancer, because it really does make a difference.
Well, thanks, Dan. That's an inspiring story, and we wish them all the best. And Bublé's new album, Love, debuts on November 16th. Well, next up, former Grey's Anatomy actress Sarah Drew joins PureFlix to star in their latest Christian film, Indivisible. Dan, tell us about the film.
Well, yeah, initially it started out as a fictional story, but when the producers were researching the film, they actually came across the story of U.S. Chaplain Darren Turner. And his story was quite remarkable, because it chronicled his desire to go in and serve these men and women who were, fighting on the front lines and seeing horrible things. And he saw that as well. But then when he comes back, it kind of threw his marriage into complete disarray. And he actually ends up getting separated with his wife because he wasn't handling the grief well, and it just really wreaked havoc in their marriage. So this movie chronicles the emotional roller coaster of a soldier and what they see at war, coming back home and trying to adapt to normal life again.
Well, thanks, Dan. Indivisible is available in theaters nationwide. Visit indivisiblemovie.com to find local listings. Back to you.
Christian singer Lauren Daigle is set to make her debut on The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon next week. She posted on Instagram that she always dreamed if she made it on Fallon's show, she'd enter by running and sliding on his desk. Last week, Daigle made her first appearance on The Ellen Show, where she performed the song Still Rolling Stones off her new album, Look Up Child. Daigle received praise and criticism for performing on the show with an openly gay host. She responded saying, quote, "I think the second we start drawing lines around which people are able to be approached and which aren't, we've already completely missed the heart of God." Her album is number 3 on the Billboard 200 and is one of the top-selling albums in America. And you can find these stories and more at cbnnews.com and on our news app. And you can reach us by emailing newswatch@cbn.com or talk to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We hope that you'll join us next time. Until then, goodbye and God bless.